Welcome, everyone. I'm going to read from the 2003 parole transcripts of Bobby Busey. Statement of facts. On the night of Friday, July 25th, 1969, approximately 45 hours prior to the fatal stabbing of the victim, Gary Hinman, Robert Busey went to Hinman's residence to buy drugs. Hinman was, at that time, dealing mescaline that he made himself. Busey was buying drugs on behalf of members of the Straight Satan's motorcycle club, who he had supplied money for the purchase in the amount of $1,000. Danny DiCarlo, who would later testify as a witness to Busey, was a member of the Straight Satan's Club and an active participant in the drug transaction. Busey delivered the mescaline he had purchased from Gary to the Straight Satans at Spawn Ranch, where Danny DiCarlo resided with his girlfriend, Susan Atkins, who would become co-defendant in Busey's case. DiCarlo and other members of the Straight Satans then took the drugs to Venice Beach for a party involving several motorcycle clubs that was to take place the next day. On Saturday, July 26, 1969, DiCarlo and other members of the Straight Satans, accompanied by members of the Satan Sleigh and Hell's Angel motorcycle clubs, returned to Spawn Ranch and confronted Busey. They accused Busey of conspiring with Hinman to burn him for the money for selling them bad drugs. The bikers roughed up Busey and threatened him with a knife. Busey told the bikers that he did not know that the drugs were bad and promised to get their money back from Hinman, DiCarlo, and co-defendant Bruce Davis. Told Busey that they would drive him to Hinman's residence to make sure that he did. Two young women, co-defendants Atkins and Mary Bruner, who were initially unaware of the difficulties between Busey and the bikers and Hinman, came along for the ride. Upon arrival at the Hinman residence, Bruner and Atkins went ahead into the house to visit Hinman, with whom they had more than casual relationships. Davis then gave Busey a 9mm pistol. Davis and DiCarlo instructed Busey to keep the gun concealed, but to produce it if Hinman failed to cooperate and return the money. They told Busey to phone them at the ranch when they obtained the money, and they would return to pick him up. Davis and DiCarlo then left with the car. In addition, Busey was carrying a knife in a sheath on his belt. Busey confronted Hinman about the allegedly bad drugs and commanded the return of the $1,000 he had given him the day before. Hinman claimed that the mescaline was not bad. In any case, that he had already spent the money. Busey became agitated and pulled the gun out and threatened Hinman with it. He struck Hinman with the gun 2 or 3 times. Hinman produced his checkbook to prove that he had already spent the money. Convinced that Hinman was telling the truth, Busey handed the gun to Atkins and told her to keep it trained on Hinman and not to let him move, though he was going to go into the other room in search of something of value that he could give to the Straight Satans in lieu of the money. While Busey was out of the room, Hinman lunged at Atkins and took the gun away. Atkins cried out, and Busey ran back into the room. He grabbed Hinman's arm and began to fight with Hinman to gain possession of the gun. While the two men were wrestling over the gun, one of the two female co-defendants telephoned Spawn Ranch, and apparently an unidentified person that there was trouble, that Hinman had taken the gun and he and Busey were fighting over it. During the struggle, the gun discharged. The bullet pierced the kitchen sink without injuring anyone, but the sudden shock of the gun's loud concussion enabled Bussolay to regain possession of the gun. Hinman offered to resolve the conflict by signing over the two titles for the two old automobiles that he owned, one of which was a dented Volkswagen van that Hinman had recently purchased for $800. Bussolay accepted. When the transfer of the titles was complete, Bussolay and the two females were preparing to leave when co-defendants Davis and Charles Manson appeared at the front door. Hinman, who was no longer being held at gunpoint, opened the front door for the two men who he considered to be his friends. Manson immediately slashed Hinman across the cheek with a long sword-like knife, taking Hinman's ear and cutting his cheek. Bussolay asked Manson why he did that, and Manson replied he was showing Bussolay how to be a man. Davis demanded Hinman give him the gun, and Hinman indicated to Davis that Bussolay had the gun. Bussolay returned the gun to Davis, and Davis expressed annoyance that the gun had been jammed. Manson angrily told Bussolay that he had made a mess of things and he needed to get it cleaned up. He told the two females who were members of his commune to help Bussolay take care of Hinman. Manson and Davis then left. Bussolay spent the rest of the night and most of the next day with Hinman, attending to his injury and talking to him in an attempt to convince Hinman that there seems to be a typographical error here, in an attempt to convince Hinman that the wound was not very serious and would heal without the need of going to his doctor. Bussolay feared Hinman would inform on him if he went to the hospital for medical treatment. Hinman became increasingly adamant about wanting to get professional treatment for the injury. Bussolay phoned Spawn Ranch for advice on what to do. Manson came to the phone and told Bussolay he was on his own and hung up. Hinman made additional demands to be allowed to go to the hospital. In a state of panic and desperation, Bussolay made the decision to kill Hinman to prevent him from telling what he knew of Bussolay's involvement of the drug deal and the assault. Bussolay stabbed Hinman once in the chest, and when Hinman did not immediately fall, he stabbed him a second time. In court testimony, the coroner said that the second stab wound was almost instantly fatal. Bussolay stated that neither of the two female co-defendants had any foreknowledge of the fatal assault and were out of the room when it occurred. The females had seemed shocked. Bussolay asked them to help him remove evidence of their presence and to take measures that might help him evade detection by the authorities. Hinman was known to associate frequently with radical militant on the USLA campus, and Bussolay decided to try to make it look as though Hinman had been killed by some of those other associates by burning some of Hinman's Marxist newspapers on the floor and by drawing political pig on the wall in the victim's blood. The three left Hinman's residence at nightfall on Sunday, July 27th. DiCarlo and members of the Straight Satans accepted the old Volkswagen van as repayment for the allegedly bad drugs and took it to Venice Beach. It was subsequently found in Santa Monica. Bussolay was arrested in San Luis Obispo on August 6th. He had been driving Hinman's other vehicle at the time, and it had broken down on the freeway. The knife used in the slaying of Hinman was in the vehicle. This is dated May 30th, 2003, signed Carolyn M. Hagan, attorney for Robert Bussolay. I had read earlier this year that one of the girls, and I forgot which one, had stated that after the murder of Gary Hinman, up on I believe it was a cabinet, or shelf or something was a bagpipe that used to belong to Gary Hinman. Now, notice in the crime scene photos, there appears to be one in the floor, which would have been over to the right of his body, where the table was, and his prayer beads. The girl also said that Cupid, as he'd walk past it every now and then, would look up there and smirk at the bagpipe. So, anyways, just something I was reading today. Peace and love, everyone. Bye.